All right. So hi, Ryan. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on my channel. I really do appreciate it. I'm really excited to have you on here. You're one of my VIP guests, and you're also somebody who I've learned a lot from. I've watched probably all of your YouTubes and, especially on the Nikshatras with Michael Reed and everything. So, and you've studied, I know you study with Ernst, you use Kala, so it's very easy, friendly to understand you because you use Kala.
Right.
So, but I will say the one thing that is kind of was confusing to me is the sidereal zodiac, with tropical zodiac, that whole debacle,
Right.
which we won't go into today. But
Well, we don't have to go into it, but are you able to tell me which way you swing so I know how to handle the situation?
well, I swing I read charts through Nikshatras because
Okay.
I can swing both ways with that. I'll say I started with Vedic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read, I was a Scorpio, Pisces, Leo. That's what got me because I never bought it like the other way. But
Right.
then, as I look at my chart the Western way, tropically, it makes sense too, so mine completely switches. So I like to say I kind of even turned into maybe more of a Sagittarius, but I don't know. I got so frustrated studying them both ways.
Right.
So I was like, screw it. I'm just Nikshatras, period.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good.
So why don't you tell everybody how you got into astrology, your little astrological story.
How I got into astrology? Well, it was a long way around, really. I started with meditation and yoga practice, and I started studying Ayurveda first. And then I read Autobiography of a Yogi, and there was a chapter in there on astrology, outwitting the stars. And I was never too much into astrology because I got to be honest, I didn't really believe in it. I thought it was a little too far out there. And one day I had a session with a Vedic astrologer, and she was able to pick things out of my personality, how I live my life, the way I sort of approach things. And I've never met this person before. So after I had that experience, I started to think a little bit more about it. And that's when I started exploring books like Astrology of the Seers, David Frawley. I took his intro course. And from that point forward, I met a teacher through the Kriya Yoga organization that I was a part of. He was in England, and he just started teaching me and sharing information and telling me how it was done. And I started applying it and seeing how it worked, and it just took off from there. So I wasn't always a full-time Vedic astrologer. I was more into Ayurveda. I did craniosacral therapy, and finally got to the point to where more people were requesting astrological sessions, and I was able to just more fully move into that kind of a practice.
And then I remember watching a video that you did, and you said how you started out doing it sidereal, and then you would read charts Western way with tropicals, and you found it to be more accurate, and people didn't even know. You didn't even tell them their signs or anything.
No, and to be honest, this is an ongoing issue with astrologers, I think. Now, not all astrologers, but like Vic DeCara and Michael Reed, we'll get these little emails about, well, how do you work with clients who are always saying things like, yes, but what about this position? They always, pick on little things that they want to focus on. And
right.
What I learned was, even doing sidereal astrology, that to try to tell someone, try to explain a lot of the principles behind astrology, if they haven't studied it in depth, they can always find a reason for something. And it's just like those kinds of people that when they go to the doctor, they've already Googled everything. They already think they know what's wrong with them. And when they get tests back, they look at their tests and they say, but what about this? When they have no idea what that number even means, and they try to make a big deal out of it. So when I do readings for people, unless they're my students, unless I've worked with them before, I don't go into what's your sign, what's your ascendant. I just say, look, what is the information you want to know? All right, here's your answer. And that's really how I approach it, kind of straightforward. Yeah.
And you seem really good with compatibility readings too, right? Like you like the counseling part of it.
I like the compatibility part in a sense because it teaches people not how to take relationships too seriously. Because when you start to do astrology for people, and you even start to pay attention to how your chart affects other people, you start to see that it's not really someone doing something to you or there's something negative about them. You just realize, oh, they happen to have their sun in Gemini, and that's where my Saturn is. So of course, when those two energies come together, we're going to have like a Saturn Sun combination. And so I enjoy that because it teaches people how to just appreciate that everyone's like a separate chemical compound, and they're going to come together in beautiful ways, and they're going to come together in bad ways. And if you just know that, life will be a lot better for you typically. So that's why I get into that. That's a lot of fun for me.
So would you say you're like a pretty big fact checker? Like that's kind of why you didn't believe the whole astrology thing? Like you really need the proof?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it takes me a long time to really get into anything until I've seen it work repeatedly. So that's why even when it comes to astrology, people will ask me about, well, what about this planet and this nakshatra with this particular yoga? And I always go back to the very basics and that, all right, well, let's just consider what are the planets, what are they doing in the chart? How are they being aspected? What are the signs involved? We need to start there, because once you start looking at things like nakshatras, which are wonderful and they're very helpful and people use them very well, but when you start trying to take nakshatras and then overlay them with so many other things, by the time you're done at the end of the day, anything could explain anything. So that's why, when you use nakshatras, that's great. And you mentioned that you primarily use nakshatras, is that correct?
I do, but it's really hard because I'm not a very studious person. So mine was all trials. Like every person I met, and being in the mortgage business and being in real estate, I would just ask people what time they were born. And like, if I would have to go out for a realtor event, I would say, hey, do you know what time you're born? I study Vedic astrology. And that's how I learned. And I got so many different people with so many different scenarios. And really, like, mine was more so based off of people, and I learned patterns, and I learned and I did the basics. Like the basics, I think you have to know up, down, left, and right. I mean, that's the main things.
Well, learning, what you're talking about, learning from people, that's exactly how an astrologer learns. I mean, when I got involved in people wanting me to do astrology for them, it was what you just said. They would ask me to do something. I thought to myself, I don't really know that much. I'll do it. And then finally, by watching how the chart related to the person, I started to see those patterns like what you're describing.
Right.
And the more you do that, the better you get. So when I talk to people who are trying to be astrologers, I say, look, just do a whole bunch of sessions for free until you get a little more comfortable. And then if you want, do sessions on donation basis. That way you know how they're responding to your work. And then eventually you'll get to the point where you have to ask for a fee because you've only got so much time in a day. So if you follow that kind of pattern and you become an astrologer, you learn which ways works for you, whether it's using the nakshatras or whether it's using just sign-based astrology, whatever it might be. That's how you got to do it.
That's exactly what happened to me. And literally I did this YouTube video so a lot of my viewers come from a conspiracy channel. Right. Because, during the election, I was talking to this one guy who's on the Leak Project. He's got like 100,000 subscribers. And, I'm always curious. And if I'll ask anybody what time they're born, literally, like you name it, that's the first question that's coming out of my mouth. And it's been like that for years since I've learned it. And like my bosses, they know I wouldn't work for them unless I got their birth times. They thought I was crazy, but everybody, like, then they turned it into a joke. So like everybody knows this. It's not even like it wasn't a secret. And it's funny because I'm always just curious because I just wanted to know, to see if it was wrong. I was always, a lot of the times I was trying to prove it wrong to see if it was ever wrong, see if it was ever off. And I found this guy and he said something that really made me think. He talked about, when he was growing up, his parents were strict. He got into some of the spiritual side and he kind of turned conspiracy a little spiritual. So I sent him a message on Facebook and I said, hey, just curious. I've been studying Vedic astrology. Your past sounds like mine. Do you know what time you were born? Mm-hmm. And I gave him like a reading, I guess. We talked and he asked me to do a show on his channel. And I was like, on what? And he goes, astrology. I was like, I'm not an astrologer. I'm a loan officer. And he goes, Heidi, yes, you are. And let's do it. And I was like, oh my God. And I did it. I was nervous, but I was like, none of the astrologers will see it because this is a totally different crowd. That's why I did it. Right. And then I found but my whole thing was, and then I had 1 million people contact me. I was reading charts for free for weeks. I didn't even know what day it was. Like it was bad. Mm-hmm. And at 5, I had to get a hold of it. Like it was just not, and I call it life coaching because I feel like you always say, you always say this, people come to you and they want to know this, they want to know that. If they don't give you don't give the answer, they're like, blah, blah, blah. And they get mad, they go somewhere else. And I look at it like And I tell people that up front. I'm like, this is like a shrink session. Like, don't think you're going to get the answers. I'm good. You're going to hear what I'm supposed to tell you, because I don't really follow procedures. And it sounds like you kind of have that, because you're never going to get 100% the right answer. But a lot of people want that.
Right.
You know, and you have a very balanced approach, which I've always admired, because you seem very grounded. You are who you are. It is what it is. You know, you're always stuck in the one straight path, and it's just, and a lot of people, you know, I've heard people had readings. It was great. I've heard, you know, you do the classes and they're great. So everybody asks me, you know, how do I learn astrology? And I'm certainly not a teacher. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so anytime I can get somebody to come on the channel so they can follow you, and, you know, because my crowd has never, some of them have never heard about astrology in their entire lives. So it's kind of like, it's different.
Well, one of the things about teaching too, I mean, the only reason I teach astrology is because there's a way that I learned that I think keeps it kind of simple for people. Now, of course, I don't think a lot of my students would think it's simple. I mean, I get a lot of complaints about the complexity of it, but the things that I share with people are only those things that I have seen work repeatedly.
Yeah.
That's why oftentimes when I'm in a discussion with astrologers, I don't necessarily talk a whole lot, because they're talking about all kinds of things that I haven't necessarily always seen to work out. Right? So I think, you know, you make a good point there, that when you're doing astrology of any kind, you always have to focus on what do you find works consistent for you. And I was going for a walk with one of my friends recently, and we were talking about how to give a good astrology session. And this person likes to ask me about all kinds of details and techniques. And finally I said, look, it's like, if you want to give a good astrology session, the underlying fundamental thing that you have to be able to do is, number one, be able to see and feel what the person's truth is, what they're looking for, and if that truth is actually within the chart. But even more than that, the astrologer, has to simply have that intense drive, that intense desire to share the best, clearest information possible. And when that happens, whether you use this particular technique, a technique I've never heard of, you know, any technique, whatever it might be, that technique will always typically work, because the intention is so strong and so pure that people who need to respond to that technique will come to that astrologer. So that's, again, also why I don't always necessarily get into, you know, technique battles with people, because I know that if I see an astrologer who knows hardly anything, but their heart is really into it, they will give readings that will just make so many people happy and help them. And I know astrologers who know every technique under the sun. You know, they try to troll me on my channel and say, yes, but what about that? And they give terrible readings, and it's because they're so caught up in their mind that they're not actually in it with their heart. And you've got to have that balance. You know, I've learned that the hard way. So I think that's important to remember.
I totally agree. I mean, I've had readings from a lot of people, then it was extremely, well, that's the reason why I studied it, because I was told I was going to die, literally. By now, I was already going to be dead. And I was obsessed. And, you know, me being that investigator, Ketu in the first house, whether it be in Scorpio or Sagittarius, you know, I find it too, the hardest people for me to do readings for are Ketu in the first house. Because honestly, they are like, because they're like me. And nobody disagree with you. Yeah, well, yeah, but then they're like, you know, they're secretive about it, or they don't, you know, or then they're the ones that always come back and ask me a million questions too. And I'm like, look, and I find it, do you feel this way, like with Rahu and Ketu, that I'm a firm believer that they are 100% like dicey. They can go either way.
Yes.
Especially when they're in somebody's like first house, seventh house access. Like It's really hard to make predictions for them, because like so many astrologers have tried to make predictions for me. They have been 100% not exactly what happened. It was like maybe, but twisted completely differently.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, Rahu and Ketu, they're definitely, I mean, what was I listening to? It might have been your video actually when I commented on it, when you said, I was driving around, I had your video on, I was listening to it, and you said something about Rahu and Ketu being totally unpredictable. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you were making a very good statement, but what had occurred to me was I was focusing on the word unpredictable.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why when you get into Rahu and Ketu dashas, it takes a lot of work to figure out what's going to go on in those time periods, because number one, they are unpredictable. But number two, the reason they're unpredictable isn't necessarily because they are unpredictable, but because it takes so much more work to figure out what's going on there. So like with a person with ketu on the ascendant or with Rahu on the ascendant, they're typically a hell of a lot more complicated than someone with Jupiter on the ascendant.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's not just going to be, oh, yes, well, this is what's going to happen. They've got so much going on inside them. And that's what we have to remember about astrology, is that in a sense, it is teaching us, it is showing us what kind of triggers or program a person has. And so if you have one program where, the program is, I'm hungry, all right, so that person gets up and goes to the fridge and eats whatever's there. You can have a more complex program that's maybe a chef. The person's hungry and immediately stop. And they start thinking about, well, what am I hungry for? And then they start thinking about flavors and how you put them together. And then it becomes a lot more complicated. And that's exactly what happens on a very PG-13 way with Rahu and Ketu. They're complicated in that regard.
They really are. I mean, and just I can admit I'm probably one of the most complicated individuals, but what really seems to calm me down is studying astrology. So I feel like people with Ketu have to really keep their minds busy with stuff like investigative mode.
Yes.
And then sometimes Rahu people need to just go explode somewhere or do whatever. It's like they need to be seen. Ketu's behind the scenes, more let me research and think. You just said the person that goes to the doctor that has all the answers, that was me before I found astrology. I Googled everything known to man. If I had a runny nose, I thought I was dying, literally.
Right.
I'm Googling all these things. And I go to the doctor, I'm like, think I have this, thyroids, this. It's just Ketu needs to investigate, I think. And Rahu needs to just be more,
That's totally. I mean, even with Ernst Wilhelm, Ernst has Ketu on the ascendant.
Yeah.
And I've got Rahu on the ascendant, and he and I share the same ascendant. And so I tell him, I always say to him, I'm like, it's like you're just a little too tight, and I'm just a little too loose.
And it's funny because I have a hard time a lot of the times following Ernst on some things, but then I completely could get to understand him certain ways and he gave me such a good reading because he has Ketu in the first. He explains that so well because it's so true. And when you have that just so prominently in your life, and it's something you have to learn how to make it work. I think, yeah.
You gotta learn to ride that dragon.
Yeah, and I think what else I've noticed? I've noticed that Rahu people seem to be, just from my doing people's charts, Rahu people seem to be better in relationships though than Ketu. I've noticed.
That's true because, and this is great. I'm glad you brought that up. It's because a lot of people think about Ketu being in the 7th house as being bad.
Right.
But what they forget is that when you've got Ketu in the 7th house, what that means is in past lifetimes, you have a lot of experience relating to other people. It's totally imbalanced. You put way too much effort and energy on doing things with people, but because you have that momentum, I have no problem making friends with people. Right. I have no problem hanging out with people. My wife jokes with me all the time. We moved here to Durham for a little bit, and she's like, "Oh, you've already made 4 friends, and we've only been here 2 days." And it's because I just know how to relate to people.
Right.
Now, that's because of all these past life issues. And when you get Ketu in the 1st house, you've got Rahu in the 7th house. That shows an individual who doesn't necessarily know how to relate in a healthy, balanced way with others. They've put more attention on themselves in past lifetimes.
Yeah.
So Rahu in the 1st, I'm learning to develop me just being me without having to have someone around. I can go play guitar by myself. I don't need another musician there, that sort of a thing. So with the nodes, it's really true that wherever Ketu is, you're going to find that a person actually is more comfortable. The problem is that they put way too much attention on defining themselves through the house that it's in.
Yeah, and I've also noticed, and I'm curious if you've noticed this, if it's in the 3rd house or the 2nd house, when Ketu's there, it's more okay, it's more focused on it though too, like to fix that problem. It feels more reliable. Like it's like, you know, it's, you would think ketu would destroy like the whole family. I've talked to a lot of people that are like, no, I just pay for everything for everybody. And I'm like the one that's, you know, and it's funny when you, wherever it is, people act like ketu is so dangerous and, you know, crazy, but I feel like it diffuses things. When Rahu does the, you know, Rahu's more of the explosions. Don't you think that? Or
it is, but again, it always goes back to what is the state of the node.
yeah.
So, you know, for example, my Rahu is with Saturn. So that means, yes, I can explode, but I've got that Saturn there.
Yeah.
Keeping it, you know, in within bounds. So that's why my explosions are controlled explosions.
Right. And that's that, and people have to understand that. I think that's so important because like if whether somebody has, you know, like a moon in Ardra, I always say this to when I have readings and stuff, I'm like, a moon in Ardra or whatever, a moon in Purvabhadapadra, right? Might not be bad. You throw it with Rahu, Mars, Saturn, and because like literally a lot of charts I see have 4 planets together in one house.
Yeah.
It's a lot of like, you know, and you have to, I am always really cautious how I go by that. That's where the nakshatras have really helped me because you see 4 planets, you just think, oh my gosh, right? I mean, and sometimes it can be that way, but I've seen it where it's gone completely reversed if it's with Rahu or Ketu and people are just like totally different than what you think, you know?
Yeah.
So
those multiple planets, you know, those are tricky.
Yeah.
I remember when I would get started, anytime I would see that, I would refer them.
Oh, I love those ones. They're my favorite.
Well, I'll refer them to you. I mean, you know, after a while, you used to see them and teasing them apart. But the difficulty that I always had with them was that it always, in a sense, indicated some confusion about a person's direction or purpose because there was too much together. Meaning someone was trying to do a whole bunch of something all at once. Right. And it's just like, again, using the music analogy, I can't play guitar, play drums, sing, and play bass at the same time. I got to pick one of those things and do it. Whereas oftentimes when you get these multiple planets in the sign, the person, in whatever way, whatever house it might be in, they're trying to do everything through that area of life. And that's where the frustration comes in with them typically. So
since I said I have a lot of conspiracy channel people, followers, I get asked a lot of crazy questions about weird stuff that I don't even know. I have to Google a lot of it, okay, because I didn't know what a lot of it is.
I've got my computer here, so I Google it too.
But what do you think are some conspiracies of the zodiac? You know, what do you think that are things maybe you've questioned? Not so much conspiracies, because conspiracies in some sort of way just means it could be the truth, or there's just no like real fact, you know, or maybe there's a half fact. And I don't know, what do you think that people question? I get a lot of religious people, but that's one of mine that, you know, astrology.
Expand on the religious thing. What do you?
A lot of people that are like, astrology is from the devil, right? It's satanic. And I'm like, no, it's not. Because I went to Christian school. I'm doing that spiel, but God.
Here's the funny thing about that. We were going out to eat with some new friends, and I knew that they were pretty intense Christians. And I don't have anything against Christians. I mean, some of my best friends are Christians. I'm not, but some of my best friends are. And I was sort of afraid to, you know, kind of get into the astrology thing because, you know, it's not that I'm afraid. It's just that I've learned over the years that some battles are best just, you know, just have your beer and be quiet. That sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
And I like these people, like, you know, so I wasn't wanting to get into anything with them. But they actually brought up, well, what do you do? So I told them. And I tried to skirt the issue. And they said, oh, you know, it seems like you're avoiding this. Like, yeah, you know, it's just one of those things that I've learned not to necessarily get into with Christians. And I said, why? It's like, you know, the magi that supposedly, you know, went to Jesus, they were astrologers, and they just sort of got into that. And they started talking about other things in Revelations and whatnot. And I don't really remember what they were saying, but they were bringing up the fact that there is something to astrology, and they feel that it's probably important. And they also went on to say things like, well, if everything is created by God and we use science in other ways, why wouldn't we use that kind of information as well to help us guide our life or to get more information about this current incarnation that we're in? And it occurred to me at that moment that, well, all right, that sounds good. And Christianity and astrology don't necessarily have to be against one another, but we always have to remember that everyone has some really weird-ass ideas. And we always have to remember that when it comes to things like religion, oftentimes people get into religion because they don't feel safe, because, you know, the world's a scary place.
Yeah.
And they want to have something to define their life by, so that, you know, when something goes wrong, they can say, oh, it's God's will or whatever it might be, or it's the devil, because that tranquilizes their mind.
Right.
And that's important to remember. And that's also why I don't typically get into conversations about religion and whatnot, because I realize that I know what's true for me.
Right.
And I know what my experiences have been. And, you know, my main focus in life is more on meditation, kriya yoga, spirituality, than it is on astrology. It just so happens that I like astrology. And that's good, because, you know, it's a good way to share philosophy with the world in what I consider to be a somewhat safe way.
Right.
So, you know, the point that I'm trying to get at here is when it comes to religion, when it comes to all these sorts of things, if someone's going to say it's satanic, you got to always remember that they've got what they've got in their head because either something happened to them when they were a kid, they were raised really weird, they feel unsafe in the world, and by demonizing someone else, that's one way of kind of isolating themselves and say, I'm safe. And not all of us can handle just loving everyone and letting everyone be what they are. You know, it's the same thing in astrology circles. You know, you touched upon the tropical and sidereal zodiac, and, you know, I'm one of those Vedic astrologers that actually uses the tropical zodiac, and that's kind of heretical in the traditional Vedic astrological circles. And I used to really get into trying to prove that point to people. And I remember last time I was actually hanging out at Ernst in Arizona, is that I just need more people like you, Ryan, more people to put that bullseye on them. You know, you're the general. You just go out there and tell them, and I'll just lay back and let you take all the arrows.
Yeah.
And I stopped, not because I was tired of getting shot at, but because I realized that you can't talk to people about things if they're so ingrained in a belief system and a psychology that kind of makes them feel safe. And oftentimes when you get dogma, especially around astrology, it's coming from that kind of psychological system, and there's not much you can do about that other than just sit there and love the person for who they are, and hopefully they're not going to shoot you.
Yeah, seriously, that's like one of the best things that astrology has taught me is just how to accept people. You know,
Right.
like when I would get so bent out of shape out of people, or why this person did this, or why she did that, why he did that, then I'm like, all right, let's just see their chart. Do you know what time you're born? And then I pull their chart up, and now I'm like, oh, it's in their chart. And I get over things. Like it's stupid. It sounds dumb, and it sounds, you know, like it doesn't even make sense, but
Well, it only sounds dumb to people who want to be pissed off about something.
I agree. And
Yeah.
I'm somebody that like I always sat behind the radar, and I would just watch you guys, and but from coming from not knowing anything about astrology, I've seen it work both ways. So I feel like the best thing to do is, you know, you want to do it that way. If somebody wants to do it KP way, that works I don't really care. It's like, just like, but there's no reason to like fight over them. Just
Right.
like religion and, you know, all that stuff. It's always something. And that's why I think it's pretty admirable. You kind of do you're always, you know, straight faced. You don't get into any fights about anything or battles. It's just you question, you ask the questions, and, you know, you can see that you're definitely into meditation. And, you know, sometimes I think that's when you meditate or just connect with that, that's when you'll get the most knowledge, intuitive knowledge, which really does help. Because there's only so much knowledge that I personally think you can have on a chart.
Right.
But when your intuition kicks in and then you ask the right questions and you say the right things, that's really what matters, you know, I think. So
Well, there are so many different techniques as well. And you always have to remember that people get overwhelmed by techniques. So even the best astrologer who knows all the techniques, he's not using all of the techniques all of the time.
Right.
You know, the best astrologers that I know, and Ernst being one of them, again, I don't really know what his process is. I've never really asked, but the idea is that again, if you can learn to feel truth as best you can, and it's like a taste in a way. You know when someone's lying to you, or you know when you're being misled. You know what that feels like. And you also know what it feels like when you lie or say something that's not accurate or appropriate, or when you're about to say something that you shouldn't say.
Yeah.
And by paying attention to those kinds of things, when you're reading a chart, if you're paying attention internally, you can start to get the sense of, all right, I'm getting ready to talk about Jupiter in the 3rd house with Rahu and Saturn. And all these things come into your mind, and you start to mention them based on techniques. And the ones that, as you start to say them, feel right in a sense, or feel true, you continue saying those things.
Yeah.
But if you start to come up upon on a technique, even if it works, 20 times before, but it's got that little, catch in it, like it's saying, no, don't say that. It's like, then you know not to say it. And that's again why I always go back to the idea with astrology is that it's much, much better to just simply try to do your best for the people that you're working for, rather than trying to be the most knowledgeable. I think knowledge is extremely helpful, and I wish there were more rational, knowledge-based astrologers out there. But until that day comes,
right. Until
that day comes, learning to feel that sense of truth. I think that's probably the most important thing. With everything, not just astrology. You don't even need astrology if you can do that, because you can just talk to someone, and they can ask you a question. And whatever pops in your head, that thing that feels like the appropriate response, that's going to be what's appropriate for them. I've seen that work over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. And just one last question. What kind of meditation do you, I'm just curious for myself, I'm always trying to, think about those things. But what kind of meditation do you do or practice? And it sounds like a lot of them, right?
Well, not a whole lot really. I mean, mainly like the tradition that I come from is called Kriya Yoga. And that focuses mainly on a type of circulating life force through the spine. It's like you imagine or visualize that you're circulating life force through the spine. You're pulling it up, letting it flow down, like the idea of the Kundalini energy. But when I do meditation, it's really pretty simple. I'll do some alternate nostril breathing, and then I'll simply do a mantra. And then I'll sit there, and I'll just observe my breath, or I'll keep my attention at the spiritual eye center, or the 3rd eye center. And I just try to settle into the clearest state possible and stay there for as long as possible. And what's been really kind of fascinating is recently I got this little gadget. I don't have it near me, but it's a portable EEG. So you put it on and it senses your brain.
Wow.
And I found that to be wonderful because it does not lie. It tells you exactly when you are in that sweet spot, and it lets you know when you're exactly out of it. And I got to tell you, if you can find devices like that to help you with
the lights.
What's that?
The lights. Does it have lights on it?
No, it's called a Muse, M-U-S-E.
Okay. I'm thinking of something else.
And if you're in Maryland, so maybe you have an Amazon affiliate program, so now you can put a link to the Muse in your affiliate program and you get 10% of profits off of every Muse you sell.
Oh.
Anyway.
Are you selling them now? I guess you're selling those.
No, I'm not selling them. I was telling it for you, so when you put the bottom of the video, then you make it.
I can't sell anything else. Oh, I get it. See, I'm so new to all this. I don't even, trust me.
Yeah. But no,
we're lucky I can upload videos, okay? That's all there is to it.
Well, so what do you do other than astrology?
Yeah.
I'm a loan officer. So you do real estate.
I actually just switched. I'm back into real estate.
Okay.
So I did a 2-year loan officer break because I was a little burned out, but I went back to real estate. I saw new construction. I was looking, it looks like you're in a fairly new place, right? Yeah. There's a lot of new construction where you're at, the area. So, well, thank you so much for doing this. And if you can just say again your websites or how to get in touch with you for a reading or, all your services, and I'll put them in the link below the video.
Okay. Well, astrovedicastrology.com is my website. Getting in touch with me is kind of hard these days. I've got, last I checked, 187 people on my waiting list. So it might take a little while before I can respond. So if you would like a reading, feel free to go to astrovedicastrology.com and go to the services section, and you'll get put on the waiting list. But in the meantime,
I think I'm still on that waiting list. Okay. That's probably why we haven't had a reading yet. I apologize.
I just, once you get on YouTube and people start watching your videos, it's amazing how far backlog you can become. But the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology. Before you get a reading, just go there, learn about astrology, and that might help you out more than any reading actually can.
Yeah,
so,
you really do a good job explaining like the conjunction. I like the new things you've been doing with like Sun and Mars and how that's going to react. And
right.
you're so right on the like Sun, Mars. You did one on Sun, Mars, and maybe it was just Sun and Mars. And I noticed so many of those patterns. So, yes.
You have Mercury in your ascendant?
No.
No?
10th.
Oh,
10th
okay.
house.
Close enough. Just because it's a prominent house. That's what I mean by that.
I have it with, yeah, well, no, it's not in my 10th house. Western way, though. No, it's not.
Is it close to your 10th cusp?
Hold on, I get confused. My chart really is weird when I switch it over Western way, because I get confused because half the chart stays the same. Hold on. So I have Venus in Libra.
Okay.
Mercury, I'm not, you know what? It's exalted in Virgo.
You don't have a debilitated Venus. You can't.
I think I do for sure.
Why?
Well, you know, I look
choice.
at it like, you know, I think that's where I feel the little bit of the Virgo.
Okay.
Was from, because I never felt Virgo. Besides, I work hard, right? Like everything else about Virgo was completely not me. And
where's your Saturn?
12th.
Okay. What sign though?
It's in Libra.
You see, that's sort of the issue there. That's what we have to be careful with different zodiacs, is that on one hand, you can say, I feel very Virgo. But on the other hand, if you get an exalted Saturn, that's going to give you a lot of similar qualities, such as hard work, you know, overthinking things, taking things too seriously, and taking too much responsibility, those sorts of things. So this is why it's difficult. And this is why also I try not to get into debates about zodiacs, because you can say things like, it's because I have this planet here. Right. But in the other zodiac, you can say, oh, well, yes, but it's also supported here.
Literally, my chart works out both. Like a big prominent thing in my life, one thing is my brother had cerebral palsy, right? Mine said of an 8-month-old in homes. He just passed away. And he's like right under a year under me. And like that was really hard for me to deal with. That was a big, you know. And Vedic way, I have Mars, Ketu, first house. You know, then Western way, I have Sagittarius, Mars, Ketu in the first, but it still made sense both ways. Like if you look at the lords, you look at the rulers, and like Jupiter debilitated, that kind of made sense to me. But Jupiter exalted, I guess, or Jupiter in its own sign made sense too. Like my chart literally made sense. I feel like I'm more now my Western chart, but when I was young, totally the dark Scorpio side, Mars, Ketu, anger, you know, like a lot of, you know, so that's kind of why it was like the nakshatras are the best, because they don't change. Well, mine do.
But also, you know, with your chart, you're talking about Mars and Ketu. That's also going to give you scorpionic energy. So if you stick in Sagittarius, it's Sagittarius, but it's still Mars and Ketu in the house of personality. And Ketu does have a type of scorpionic energy, right?
Yeah.
That's why oftentimes, I mean, I don't think this is true, but that's why some people might say, you know, Ketu does well in Scorpio and Rahu does well in Taurus. So you're right. And that's the reason why it's not necessarily the best idea to get in debates about zodiacs, because, you know, can I say I'm a Virgo ascendant or am I a Leo ascendant? Well, when it comes to one, I'm a Virgo ascendant. What's that?
Is that what you're a Virgo ascendant?
In the tropical, I'm a Virgo ascendant. Okay. And in sidereal, I'm a Leo ascendant.
What nakshatra? Maga?
Yeah.
Which is on my Mercury.
Yeah.
All the astrologer teachers I follow have like, they're all Geminis. They have heavy Gemini energy and they have heavy Leo energy, like both. It's weird.
Well, and that's speaking to that point. So in sidereal, I would be a Leo ascendant, right?
Yeah.
But then I get Mercury. I get Mercury and Jupiter in Leo in tropical, and in tropical I'm Virgo, so I still get that Leo energy because then my ascendant Lord goes into Leo. So you see these overlaps. That's why it's extremely hard to tease these things out, because you can always kind of go back and find, well, of course this makes sense. Like there are things that would still give that similar impact, that same energy in both charts. That's what makes it hard.
Right. It's true, because especially when you flip both ways. I always love when I get somebody that's the same, right? Like their ascendant is like really low degrees in one sign, and then you flip it over and then it's just really high degrees.
Right.
That's always the best way, because I still switch them over to see. I think you can use them both. I really do. I believe that you can confirm things this way, looking at them both ways.
The key though is always, I think, dignity, the dignity of the planet. And that's also somewhat hard to pin down for the reason that not everyone self-reports accurately. You know, so when I went from sidereal to tropical, I lost my exalted Jupiter. Well, I like my exalted Jupiter, but when I really think about how Jupiter functioned in my life, it was definitely not exalted. But Jupiter's position by house is going to be the same. So again, the issue that I'm trying to get at here is that when it comes to planets, once we start to get into dignity, and if we have someone that can self-report accurately, or if you're able to observe them over a long period of time, you can start to see how those signs make the difference. And that's really the big issue between the zodiacs. It's how the signs make the difference. Otherwise, it's just like what you're saying. Things are going to shift, but they're still going to be generally in the same angular positions from each other. And that's why you can usually still get the same information from both charts.
Right.
Anyway.
Especially if it's something like tragic, like a death, like, you know, and with my brother passing away, I looked at since I had his time, I have his birthday, when he passed away. And I mean, you could see it in both houses, like both charts, both ways, like a lot, one way it was more seventh house. And I've noticed, I'm just curious, and this isn't probably something that we really should talk about much, but death, do you notice that a lot of people, when they pass, it's in the seventh house? I noticed it's a lot in the seventh.
Well, and that's because, you know, the seventh house is as far away from the first as possible. So, and if you think about it, believe it or not, when you look at the sign of Libra is associated with death and transformation. And if you think about it, Saturn is exalted in the natural seventh house of Libra. And that's because in that seventh house, that's where things change form or manifestation. So that's also why Libra is the house of, it can be the house of business and business partnerships with seventh house, because in order to have a business agreement or partnership or money or things exchanging hands, I have to let go of my money to give it to you, so I have to lose it.
Yeah. Just
like when it comes to life and transformation, to become something else, you have to have a change. And so that's why the seventh house or Libra often has an association with things. It's what's called a Mark house, association with things like death and transformation in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, the exalted planets, debilitated planets, you know, sometimes I just question that, you know, all the time though, because I see it a lot. Like sometimes an exalted planet can be like I think like exalt things in a very strong way where it can be really negative.
Yeah. You know? Well, it also depends on the ascendant too. You know, for example, you know, certain planets are good for certain ascendants.
Right.
And so it's the same thing with Saturn. You know, Saturn has a role to play, but if he's playing his role too strong and too active, well, that's when it's going to become imbalanced. So the issue with the exalted planets is that we always have to be cautious of them, because that is where a big imbalance can occur, because it's like there's so much force and so much energy going towards those planets. Yeah. The same with the debilitated planet. Sometimes they don't cause problems because there's no energy around them. Mm-hmm. You know, and we don't notice them, and they don't come into awareness so much.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I mean, I think that's what you just said. It's really the energy. Like there's just that force. It could go depending on which house that's in, where, you know, it can be rough. Like I personally, Saturn in the 12th, like exalted, you know, right. And that's been a lot of dark stuff too.
Yeah, and for you, whether it's Sagittarius ascendant or Scorpio, it doesn't matter. Saturn is still not necessarily the best planet for you.
Right. It's not fun.
Right. So you
need to I will say I did learn astrology through it. So, you know, I guess you look at it and
But that's the point of astrology, is that, I wish that I knew someone, or I wish my parents knew someone that was a good astrologer when I was a kid, because then they could have looked at my chart. And this is why, to be honest, you would not think this of me watching my videos, but my favorite kind of astrology to do is actually astrology for children.
Same here. One of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. And then the reason that's the case is my own personal life. Thinking back, I was like, wow, I was so radically different than my family and my parents. If they had an astrologer, if they were into that they trusted, they could have learned about Rahu on the ascendant, or whatever it might have been, or, Mars in the 10th house. And then they could have helped me learn to understand that and grow with it. I had to wait until I was in my late 20s and early 30s before that even made sense to me.
No, that's so true. And trust me, with ketu, I was destructive as all hell and manipulative, which is why, I think all those demons got out early. I was just escaping a mess. And I think that is so important that
But you were probably a lot of fun at a party, right?
No.
No, okay.
I was always grounded, literally. I was grounded 24/7. So I would sneak out, and then you get manipulative and, you just do your thing. And I don't know. If I was 10, 12, I swear, and I had a reading, or my parents had a reading and knew not to maybe be so strict or maybe deal with me a different way, I probably would have, finished school, done this, who knows, maybe I would be an attorney, because if I were to do it, that's what I always say, I would want to be like an attorney. But
like an attorney.
Yeah. Try to be. I try to be. So I'm a pretend one. So yeah, so I just wish that's where it's so important, because if you can catch these things, and I look at everybody that has problems that way. They only had an astrology reading when they were this, or their parents only had a reading. I love doing kids. It's the kids' parents, not necessarily talking to the children.
Right. No. Yeah, not that. But, and it's important to remember, and this is sort of the frustrating thing about doing astrology sometimes, is most of the time people come to you after they've already made the mistake.
Yeah, right. Very true.
For some reason, all the compatibility sessions I get are, we just got married, can you do my compatibility? I'm like, what the fuck, why would you?
Right.
Now you go to a marriage counselor to work this out. I'm like, you should have got this ahead of time.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing with kids. My most enjoyable clients are those clients, and I've got quite a few of them actually, who they give me their children's chart. They say, this is what's going on, whether it's health, whether it's psychological things or school related things. And I gotta say, I have had such wonderful luck working with parents, and that relationship has been so rewarding, because I know that those kids are now being taken seriously for what their interests are. They're not being, looked over because their parents are trying to force things upon them. And they're interacting with their parents in almost the parents, I guess, I think, are being a little more responsible. That's just my thought on it. So those types of things, I think people need to go to astrologers before they do the thing or make the mistake or whatever it is, not try to come to the astrologer afterwards to clean up the mess, because we're not EMTs or whatever.
Yeah, that's so true, because to explain it, it's always good to explain some of the tragedies, but I try to focus mainly on, the positive things and all the good things that they have, because some people, I know for the first 2 weeks that I started after I did that YouTube, I talked to some people that had prison, maybe could have been in jail at that moment. I don't know. I talked to a lot of different people, and I wanted to work in corrections. It's so funny. And, just because I wanted to know the psychology of people, and because sometimes people overlook them or don't give them a chance. But if I look like they only had a reading, maybe they would have focused that energy on something else, maybe on their more spiritual energy or this kind of energy, because most people that are very spiritual, I notice, and are truth seekers and want to know this kind of stuff, have screwed up charts. Let's be honest, right? So it's they just didn't get a reading. So I feel like the more you can just tell people about astrology, you're just doing better for society,
Right. Do you watch Orange is the New Black?
No, I don't watch TV at all. You know what's really funny though? My sister does, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, Heidi, you have to watch this one thing, this one show on The Orange is the New Black." She goes, "This girl literally," so she made me watch this part, and it was a one inmate, and she like held her down. She's like, "What time were you born?" And like was choking her because she was into astrology or something. And yeah, but no, I've never watched it.
It's addictive.
I watch YouTubes.
Yeah.
I watch conspiracy theories. That's probably my biggest.
So what's your biggest conspiracy theory that you're into?
Oh, well, I'm really, really like the Illuminati stuff, obviously. The whole, my family was some Masons, so the whole, the Masons. And recently I'm dabbling into the aliens and stuff. But, there's so many things that are, go ahead.
What about that tunnel under the Alps that's supposedly changing all of our, realities?
The CERN?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know Shiva's the emblem?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. So this is why it's so funny, because most conspiracy theory, okay, I just learned this, but if you literally type this, I probably shouldn't even say this, but if you type in the Illuminati backwards, okay, it literally takes you to the NSA website. And I did it, and the guy was like, "You probably shouldn't do this," and I did it anyway, and it literally did, and it kind of freaked me out. But, my thing is more like, I don't know, just government stuff. I'm more like politics and.
Okay, so you don't get into that far out there stuff.
No, I mean, I think aliens exist for sure. I'm really into this David Icke, and I really like John Hogue. Have you heard of him? Because he's really into meditation. He's actually doing a Nostradamus prophecies.
What is it now?
Nostradamus prophecies. Yeah, it's he's really smart, but just more of like I'd say history, and maybe like with Hitler, just that kind of stuff, conspiracies of leaderships and like the mind control stuff. But I don't know, my mind's been going on a whole new level lately, and it's scary when you start like really fact checking some of it. You're just like, God, I hope this isn't true, but my God, if it is true, it makes sense. Like, maybe
you've been drinking too much fluoride.
No. No, but it's just crazy just to think that the government can do all that. But David Icke talks about this thing called the Saturn moon matrix. And Saturn, you should watch this one time, but it's like Saturn wasn't really Saturn at this one moment. Now the sun wasn't the sun, right? The real sun that we look at, they think it might have been Saturn, the Saturn moon matrix. They say the government made the moon. And I don't know, it just really, once you start looking to the research that he's done and stuff, you're like, God, I hope that's not true, but because then it screws everything up with astrology, right?
It's like discredit the nakshatras, which have been around for a while, so it must have been a pretty old government.
I know. That's why I stick with the nakshatras. Hey, well, I have one more question for you. With the nakshatras, do you think the moon nakshatra is the most important, or do you think that the other planets are important too? Have you seen them work?
I think they're all important when it comes to nakshatras. I think the moon nakshatra is the most important one, because that's going to tell you, because we have to remember, this is the beautiful thing about astrology, is that we have the sun and the moon, and they're considered to be the royal luminaries. And if you read like Yavana Jataka talks about how the sun and the moon, they are the rulers of the zodiac, and that the other signs, the planets are just stewards of the other signs. And so, for example, like Virgo, it's a negative sign because it's an even sign. So the moon is typically the ruler of Virgo overall, but Mercury is a steward of that energy of Virgo. And then you get to Libra, which is 7, which is a positive number. So that's the active fashion. And so that's really the sun's sign in a way, but Venus is a steward of it. And so the moon becomes really important in that regard, because the moon tells you how well, in a sense, all the other planets are going to do. Because the ascendant tells the path that a person is on, but the moon tells you what the person's character is. All right. That's why my path is rough with all my malefic planets on my ascendant, but my personality, well, some people might disagree, is kind of okay because I've got a whole bunch of benefics hitting my moon. So you can have a person in a difficult situation, which would be like a rough path, but if their moon is good, that shows a person who can hopefully, ideally, navigate it well due to better character. Now, again, you know, it's not to say everyone has flaws, so it's not to make someone perfect, and everyone makes mistakes. But on the other hand, you can have someone who's on a great path, which is like the ascendant, where everything flows for them, but they're a total asshole. And that could be, you know, a lot of difficult situations going on with the moon. So just to get back to your question, I don't know why I had to go into all that, but yes, the moon is the most important, but the moon is going to tell us, in a sense, how the other planets are going to function in their nakshatras, because the moon is always going to have more power based on the fact that it is, in a sense, the creator of the nakshatras. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Is your moon in Scorpio?
My moon is right on the very cusp in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So.
So what my Jupiter is then, I think.
Yeah. So that might be why I decided to do this interview rather than to watch the next episode of Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, that's funny.
I've got one more question for you.
Yeah.
So what's this flat earth theory thing?
Well, I don't really know all of it, but they say that the earth is flat. And actually somebody said that Vedic astrology is like the flat earth. Literally, somebody wrote that on my comments, and I don't know, I didn't understand it, but I'm not really into that so much. I can't see it, so I don't know. Like if
it's true, because when you're on the ocean, you sort of see.
What do you think? Do you think the earth is flat? No, that's good. Do you?
I do not think the earth is flat.
I don't really either, but like, I don't know. But round, I guess.
we do have to say, I do have to qualify that by saying that I've never been in a space shuttle, so I've never actually seen if the planet is round or not. So I do not know that for sure. And being a Virgo ascendant, I'm just going to say that my sense is that it's probably round, but you know, who knows? Okay,
so you have, well, that makes sense too. Rahu and Saturn in Virgo. That's why you're very practical, and like, I get a lot of Virgos that they're fact checkers. They don't just believe anything.
No, you can't. I mean, like, and that's sort of the problem with the world. You start believing anything, then you go down this hole, and what you find is, you know, since you're into conspiracy theories, and again, whatever you like, but people who typically start going down any hole, they will find more and more things to prove their point. I mean, and I'm not talking about conspiracy theories, I'm talking about anything. You start thinking that there are demonic forces out in the world, all of a sudden you're going to see them everywhere. You start thinking there are angels in the world, all of a sudden you see them everywhere. All of a sudden, you know, you think the only car in existence is a Toyota Camry. What do you see all the time now? Toyota Camrys.
That's true.
So what we have to remember is that the mind, and this to tie this all together, in yoga, the book called Vasistha's Yoga, the main point that this book makes, aside from all this is the infinite consciousness, is that your mind creates exactly what you want to see. And for example, the religious fanatics, that is real for them.
Yeah.
Who are into conspiracy theories, that is real for them. My dad, who could care less about any of those things, what's real to him? Motorcycles and speedboats. That's great. You know? Yeah. Everyone finds their thing, and that's the important point about astrology, is that's just one more person's thing, right? You know,
that's so true. And that's a good way of thinking at it. You know, that's important, I think, for sure, because I think people get so wrapped up in their beliefs, and you know, I see it in the astrology side too. When everybody battles on, man, some of my worst haters were from the astrology side, especially like with politics, and you know, when I go down that road, that's what I really like, is politics.
Right. And
you know, you go down that road, and really, it's like everybody just needs to calm down. Like, you know, everybody's like, and this and that, and it's more of like the public that you're just like, why is everybody so stressed out over this?
Yeah.
That's what's concerning to me. It's like the overall, you know, I don't know. It's
well, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying there, but I do have a lot of friends that are in minority groups. And
so do I. So
yeah,
do I.
and I didn't mean to say that you did not.
Yeah, so do I. Yeah.
But I listen to them talk, and you know, me as you know, white male, I'm like, yeah, what's the problem, right? You know, my worst thing is people see my tattoos and my long hair, and I get judged. But still, it's nothing compared to my friend who adopted 3 African American children, and she has to tell the oldest, look, you can't walk out in public with a hoodie on, you know, something that I would never even think of. And she has to explain that to him because where they live, people think something about that, you know.
Right.
And I think that, you know, there is the side of it which is sort of blowing out of proportion, but there is the other side of it where there are people who are really getting the shaft pretty hard. And I mean, that's what can you do about it? That's the thing. You just got to try to do your best to support them in whatever way you can. And it's sometimes hard to know which way that is, but definitely trying to stay calm in that situation is probably the best approach.
That's I agree, because that if there's anything that I don't agree with is like, you know, I like foreigners and foreign people. With you and I, with Ketu and Rahu in the first, we like other cultures more in our own, right, in a way. So I don't know, I'm speaking for myself. I don't know if that's you too, but I just feel that, you know, that's why I kind of like to go on these shows and do this, because a lot of the Christians, you know, people that are really religious, they don't even, you know, understand. Like their brains, like I didn't know any of that stuff existed. I grew up in Pittsburgh. There was no culture. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know what an Indian person was until I moved to Maryland and sold homes to them. Right. And I felt like a jackass, right. You know? So like sometimes Americans are so sheltered and so, you know, we don't even realize it. And then when I got to the numbers and I knew there was 1 billion people in India and there's not even 1 billion people in the USA, and, you know, you just learn these statistics. You're like, why do we think we're so great? And so I'm 100% on like those type of sides. That's, you know, but you know, there's a whole nother side too that you're like, just relax. Everybody kind of needs to just calm it down, because we're not us, but you know, everybody's doing it to everybody. I feel like getting people riled up and stuff.
Well, the trick is, I think, if possible, I mean, I know sometimes you just have to stand up for yourself. That is true as well. But I think the trick is to try to find ways to have communication that's more about asking questions. Like, for example, I had a relative, they're very, very conservative, and they brought up some point about how they were sort of aggravated and frustrated that, is it EBT cards, like people, like food stamp cards, that they're now going to be able to be used on Amazon, like Amazon Prime, for a discount, and we have to pay the full price, you know, and all this sort of thing. And so I thought about it, and I was sitting there and I said, well, it's like, you know, because I really don't go either way politically. I just try to, you know, let people have whatever they want. But I thought about that, and I said, well, so are we mad at poor people, or who he considered to be poor people, for doing that, for getting a discount with a big corporation? Or are we mad at the corporation for figuring out a really brilliant way to make a hell of a lot more money?
I know, it's so true. That's so true.
You know, and by saying that, I could tell that this person started to think a little bit like, oh, well, maybe it's not, you know, the quote poor people's fault. maybe the corporations are doing something to contribute to all of this. And I think that if we, as somewhat calm individuals at times, can start to, without anger and aggression and force, just kind of throw these little ideas out there, maybe, again, I'm not an aggressive person, so that's probably why I'm not into protesting, that sort of thing, but maybe that can help to change people's minds on a little level from time to time. That's just a thought. Yeah. Anyway.
Everybody needs an astrology reading, is my opinion.
That's right.
Because it's all in the charts. That's what I say.
It is, yes.
Well, thanks so much for doing this with me, and I hope you have a great evening. And
yeah, you too.
So much, Ryan. Okay.